Hey guys, Graham and Chris back here with you once again on Out of Left Field. Week 2 of the Major League Baseball spring training season is in full effect. The World Baseball Classic right around the corner, and just like every week, we have a full slate on the show to bring you today. Brett Lawrie being released, the Nationals picking up another reliever, and the Cubbies and the Indians. We will bring you finally finishing out our breakdown of all 30 teams in Major League Baseball. Chris, my man, I know you were over in Arizona, and as nice as it is for us both to live in spring training states, we haven't seen one damn game. So what's going on, brother?
Oh, yeah, I've been so busy with midterms, and even now I'm on spring break, but I have work and I have schoolwork to do, so it doesn't look like I'm going to be getting to any spring training games anytime soon. However, I do have season tickets to the Arizona Diamondbacks, so I'm sure I'll see some baseball this season.
Yeah, I'm a little jealous on that one, but hopefully I'll be getting a chance to take a look at the Rays and the Marlins this year. The All-Star game is going to be in Miami this year, so if I somehow manage to scrounge up some money or win the lottery, you won't hear me on here anymore, and I'll be sitting down by the field at Marlins Park for the All-Star game. But, man, what do you say we go ahead and put the ball in play? A lot to get to. We mentioned it right off the top. And that is a team that that started off red hot and was talk of Major League Baseball, the talk of our show when we started last year. Man, we're about 2 months away from our 1-year anniversary starting the show. But that's just the Chicago White Sox. They started off hot, ended up kind of finishing off in obscurity. The Cubbies, their crosstown rivals, win the World Series. And now, in a relatively surprising move, the White Sox announced on Friday they have requested release waivers on infielder Brett Lawrie. Now, likely he's going to clear them. He's getting $3.5 million for the 2017 season. He'll be a free agent. The nice thing, though, for the White Sox, granted, everyone thinks, okay, baseball, they're going to owe him the $3.5 million. An arbitration contract is not fully guaranteed until opening day, so the only thing they're on the hook for really is about $574,000, a 30 days termination pay. So, man, tell us about Brett Lawrie. As an umpire, I know him from slamming his helmet down and hitting Bill Miller in the leg in Toronto a couple of years ago, and Bill Miller subsequently had beer thrown at him and on him from a fan in Toronto. Stay classy up there, Blue Jays fans. But tell us who Brett Lawrie is, what this means, if anything big for the Sox. And I think the bigger question is going to be, can his services be useful somewhere else around the bigs?
Well, see, that's the problem with Brett Lawrie is Brett Lawrie has an attitude. He's kind of a pest in the clubhouse, and so that's going to make him hard to move, right? It's going to make it hard for him to find a place to land. And the other thing that's going to make it hard to find a place to land for him is he played 94 games last season, only hit 248. I realize he only had 384 plate appearances, but the season prior to that, when he had 602, he played 149 games, more typical season out of Brett Lawrie. He still only hit 260 and was sub 300 in his on-base percentage. That's mediocre play. That's replacement level play, and probably even below replacement level play. And when you get into a situation with a guy who has problems in the clubhouse, has problems at the plate, has problems as a defender, I mean, his fielding percentage, which I know people don't like to use fielding percentage to judge a defender, but as a baseline, his fielding percentage is only .978 last season, and historically it's only 9.5. So that means he makes errors. He has throwing issues. He's a problem on the field. He's a problem at the plate. He's a problem in the clubhouse. And how many teams are going to want to pick up a guy like that? The only couple places that I can think of where Brett Lawrie makes sense to land are the New York Mets or the Los Angeles Angels, who have a need for a third baseman. He probably won't play second base anymore, since third base is his natural position. The Chicago White Sox were kind of pushing him into the second base role. And obviously, second base isn't a place where New York needs him, and second base isn't a place where Los Angeles needs him anywhere with Maben and Espinoza and Valbuena that they picked up in the offseason. But the New York Mets have Jose Reyes, and you and I both know that Jose Reyes is he's
not what he used to be. Clearly, once he left there, and the Marlins shelled out all this money for Reyes and Mark Burley and a ton of these guys. Josh Johnson was still there, and then shipped them off in a season or two up to Toronto. He hasn't been the same, and there have been some domestic violence issues, and that's neither here nor there with his on-the-field play. But the bigger problem right now with the Mets is that David Wright is hurt again, and he's a guy who he plays the game right. He's loved up there. He's the captain for the Mets, whose career is really coming to a very fast and inauspicious end, which is really unfortunate. Was a good player. It still has the desire for the game. I think it's one of those things where he needs to start looking at what he can do for the organization, maybe in a coaching role. The Mets are going to want to keep him around. He's beloved by the fans. He's loved in the organization. But with Brett Lawrie, it was really touted as one of the top prospects in baseball in 2011. Came in at 21 years of age, 43 games, so not a great sample size in 2011, but hit 293 and 953 OPS. Again, small sample size. And then, let's see what we get in a broader spectrum of the season. In 125 games in 2012, his average dropped 20 points to 273, and that OPS was all of a sudden in the 700s. And that 729 OPS is the best that he's had since, for the rest of his career. So one of those things, like you said, primarily a third baseman. And I can remember in 2015 with the Oakland Athletics, they were in Kansas City, and there was a bunch of beanball issues going on. Brett Lawrie was at the center of that. So I don't think he'll go to the Mets. I don't think the Mets have as much of a use for him. With the way the Angels have been playing, if someone's going to pick him up, I could see it happening there. You made mention of the Rays when we were coming on, and I think we both agree that's not a sensible spot because Evan Longoria is not going to leave third. He doesn't want to at this point. He still wants to play. And, yes, you lose Logan Forsythe, but do you really want to go ahead and have Brett Lawrie continue to try and learn? And I hate to say learn in a way of he doesn't understand the position, but he's not as comfortable at second base. So I believe he'll get picked up. He's 26, 27 years old, so still plenty left in the tank for him. And a team is going to be interested in picking him up, I have no doubt. Just turned 27, actually, January 18th. So he will go somewhere. It's just a matter of where he goes.
Yeah, I have no doubt that he's going to get picked up. Like you said, he's going to go somewhere. Speaking of going somewhere, though, somebody else went somewhere this week, and that is Dodgers reliever Joe Blanton, who actually went to the Nationals, and probably not his first choice. There's kind of a joke in the Washington Post saying that it's not wine country. But hopefully Joe Blanton could help the Nationals maybe make a deeper run into the playoffs. They say give him a chance to win a World Series. I don't see that happening this year, not with the very likely repeat in the World Series of the Indians and the Cubs. But I think that he is absolutely going to be a boon to them. What do you think about Joe Blanton? I mean,
a guy who for $4 million and $1 million in incentives, I don't mind it. I mean, we know that the Nationals needed bullpen help. There was no question, and they struck out multiple times trying to get help at the back end of that bullpen. He was solid. Yes, he gave up the homer to Miguel Montero I think it was game 1 of the NLCS. I might be wrong. But it was a huge turning point there. Maybe it let them in too long. Whatever the case may be, but Joe Blanton has been to me, after he left Philly, came back able to come out of the bullpen strong. It's nice to have a longer reliever here. I think it makes sense. He's a guy who we know isn't going to be in the league probably more than the next 2 or 3 years. I'd say by 2020 he's probably going to retire. But for what you're getting him for price-wise, I don't have a problem with it. And they definitely could use a piece in the middle of that bullpen to help shore it up, because if what everything we were hearing is true, like what Dan Plesac told us from MLB Network and has been saying, is that there's a good possibility here that the Mets, if they can stay healthy and they can have some big sticks consistently produce, if that rotation is healthy and those guys stay there, man, I think to me the bigger piece of the Nationals is going to be what either Tanner Roark does or Gio Gonzalez. That's the piece I think means more to them for a long-term run into the postseason this year. But Joe Blanton certainly is a really good pickup. But do you hear that?
What?
Do you hear anything?
No.
Oh, I think it was a big sigh of relief coming from Fort Myers where the Red Sox play, because David Price is not going to have Tommy John surgery. That news coming out, and a huge sigh of relief from every single Red Sox fan that I know. If you have been living under a rock or just hate the Red Sox, maybe you live in New York, not under a rock, but he was back at Red Sox camp today, was shut down, thought that maybe he was going to have Tommy John surgery, had to have the worst thing possible, a second opinion by Dr. James Andrews. Second opinion and Dr. James Andrews are 6 of the worst words you can hear if you play Major League Baseball on the Hill. And it turned out that a word that you also wouldn't normally like to hear ends up being very, very good for David Price, and that is the word unique. He said, quote, "They told me that I have a very unique elbow, and I've heard that before, but not from guys that have done the surgeries they've done and looked at as many elbows as they have looked at. So just to hear it from those 2 guys, it felt good," end quote. And by very unique, this is according to the Boston Herald, apparently his joint has an ability to heal very quickly that most guys don't. So he's going to be shut down for 7 to 10 days, but that's it. And that is huge to the Boston Red Sox in the beginning of their season.
Especially
exactly. I mean, talk about a painful blow. That definitely would have changed. It would have changed the landscape in the American League East, in so much as to say that I think it would have gone ahead and bunched together definitely the Jays and the Red Sox. We'll see what the Orioles do. Buck Showalter's never a manager that you can just write off. He's going to find a way to use what he has to the best of his ability. But, yeah, this is a huge piece with an MRI that comes back inconclusive, just a little bit of discomfort in the elbow. So you know that they are happy. He also went on to say, David Price, quote, "They expected it to be a lot worse than what it was." That was both of them. They said it multiple times. They said, "We expected this to be a lot worse than what it really is." Everything that they said, honestly, I don't feel like that meeting could have went any better. I don't look at this to be anything too serious, end quote.
It's not just that they're heaving a sigh of release over the fact that David Price isn't going to have surgery, although that is a big deal. It's just that the Red Sox have gotten so much bad news this offseason that this would have just been the straw that breaks the camel back. This is David Price going down, especially to something like Tommy John, gone for the year, would have been the thing that could have definitively said, no, the Boston Red Sox are not going to repeat as division champs this year.
Definitely, and it's awesome that you have Rick Porcello still there. You're going to have Stephen Wright. Obviously, you have Chris Sale coming over. But, yeah, you talk about kind of getting the wind sucked out of you. And, I mean, and let's not make any bones about it. David Price struggled last year mightily. He led the team in wins, but his ERA, again, talking early, was really rough. And I saw a lot of guys on Facebook and social media groups talking about how, man, don't you wish you still had Clay Buchholz? Well, no, number one, I don't. But, it's also nice that they aren't going to have to worry about needing Clay Buchholz long term, because it looks like at least at this point that David Price is okay. Now, that's not to say that this couldn't rear its ugly head and could get worse, and hopefully it does not. But very, very happy for him, for the Red Sox, that they can breathe that nice sigh of relief that, one of their ace pitchers is going to be available for the start of the year.
You never want to hear the words, "Gee, I wish we still had Clay Buchholz." Those are never words that you want to utter or hear uttered by your general manager or head coach. That's just terrifying, to be honest with you.
Very. I couldn't agree. I don't think I agree more with you on that one.
But if things don't go the way Jake Arrieta plans them, you might hear the Cubs saying, "Gee, I wish we still had Jake Arrieta." Turns out Jake Arrieta wants $200 million plus in his next contract year. Mind you, we're talking about a guy who has had a couple of really light him up years, including last year, the year before last, 2015, his Cy Young year, when he went 22-6 with a 1.77 ERA and pitched 229 innings. He fell off from that average a little bit last year, had a 3.10 ERA, which is a little closer to his career average. But his career average is really brought down. If you go back and look at him, he's never, before 2014, he's never a sub-3 guy.
He was a scrub in Baltimore, and I don't mean this in disrespect. Let's be honest. He was a scrub for the Orioles, who no one thought. You and I remember the term in the Army. He was that can't get right. You know what I mean? You never thought he was going to find this Cy Young stuff.
Yeah, and so you go back to 2010 when he comes into the league, and he plays in 18 games, starts in 18 games, only gets 12 decisions, goes 6-6 with a 4.66 ERA. The next year, he has a 5.05. The next year, he has a 6.20. Again, starting 18 games, only gets decisions in 12 of them, goes 3-9 in 2012. Scrub is probably a nice description of Jake Arrieta in Baltimore.
Well, I'm the nicer of the two of us. I am the nicer of the two of us.
You are. Not looking, but other than that, yes. He takes off out of Baltimore, goes to the Cubbies, and almost immediately turns himself around. He had a 7.23 ERA in his first 5 games in Baltimore, comes to the Cubs, starts 9 more games, has a 3.66 ERA, and has not looked back since. That was his first time in his career having a sub-4 ERA, and since then, last season was his first time going over 3. So,
and we look at this. You mentioned, coming in to the Cubbies, he'd given up in 5 games 25 hits for the Orioles. Had 19 runs, not all 19 were earned, and 2 dingers in 5 games. Now, granted, he has done better to keep the homers down. He gave up 7 in Chicago. Now, granted, Chicago is a very short porch, not the deepest ballpark, but in 9 total games, 34 hits. So only 9 more hits in 9 additional games, and gave up 22 runs. So yeah, I don't know what it was. It was just one of those guys who doesn't translate well in one league compared to the other. And when we've seen that multiple times, it's something that I don't think makes a lot of sense. You can't ever put your finger on why that is, but he's one of those guys who comes to a National League team and seems to just bear down and get it. And that's kind of the antithesis of a guy who he's modeling this contract request after in Max Scherzer. And something that you and obviously you're a much bigger football fan than I am. You're wearing a Niners jersey right now while we're doing the show. But one of the things that we talk about, when is your peak, right? LeBron James right now in the NBA, is just past his prime. The mid to late 20s is kind of your prime. Well, with a lot of these pitchers and a lot of baseball players, really, because of the time it takes to make the major leagues, they don't really hit that contract year until they're really in the middle or beginning to crest over what their prime really is. Max Scherzer's 31. Jake Arrieta is 30, and now he's looking for a brand new deal upwards of $200 million. And because of the fully guaranteed atmosphere of what Major League Baseball is, that's the problem that I have there. Not that Arrieta isn't deserving of that much money, but is he deserving of that much money at this age? Is there a team, and there are going to be teams who are going to try and hold on to him and hope that we kind of get to see what Justin Verlander has done, where he struggled a couple of years ago and came back, like we discussed 2 weeks ago, and we'll see if he returns to form this year. But I don't know, Chris. I understand a guy, you want to make your money, you got out there, you've worked your tail off, go get paid. But this is going to be a very important year for him. To go from a 1.77 ERA and a 22-6 record to 18-8 and a 3.10 ERA, and that's a pretty decent jump. It's 1.4 runs additionally per 9 innings. That's a pretty good-sized jump, and I don't know if we see those kind of numbers again this year. I don't know what that's going to mean for him long term, and it also makes me wonder if they don't see the possibility of re-signing him. Do they try and make a move with Arrieta to try and pull some pieces in for the postseason if they think that Lester and Lackey and those guys can take care of business, and Arrieta isn't going to be a piece that you need to make it deep into October?
Well, I can't see the Cubs ever making the decision that Arrieta is not a piece they need to get into October baseball or to get deep into October baseball. But with a $200 million price tag, I can see pragmatism taking over at that point. The problem I have with it is exactly what you said. He's 30 years old, and there's really only a couple of ways to get to $200 million and not have a ridiculous hit to your annual budget. I realize there's not a salary cap in baseball, but there is that luxury tax. And if you don't want to end up paying ridiculous amounts of tax, especially after that tax was restructured this past offseason, if you don't want to end up paying a ridiculous amount of money in tax because this guy's getting $40 million a year if you go 5 years, right?
Yeah,
the only way to get
like
to
I would think they would.
The only way to get to
$200
$200 million
a little bit, but yeah.
The only way to get to $200 million is either give him a 10-year contract at $20 million a year, or give him a 7-year contract at $30 million a year.
Which at 30 years old, a 10-year contract would make absolutely no sense for a pitcher, because you're not going to have a guy who can't.
7 more years doesn't make any sense for a pitcher at this point.
Right.
At this stage of the game, 37 is on the very outside edge of when you can even imagine a pitcher going out on the mound and starting 30 games a season. And even then, I don't see it happening. By the time he's 37, he's going to either have moved to a bullpen reliever role, or he might be getting ready to get out of the league.
Yeah, you're not going to be paying him, $15, $20 million a year and have him doing what Joe Blanton is doing for the Nationals, who we just talked about. And the difficulty here, and I hate to say this, but it's what sports is. If he came in the league when he was roughly 23 years old, it's one of those things where you weren't performing the way that you are now, the way you were then, clearly. So that is going to go ahead and it's going to affect your earning potential. So, no, I can't disagree with you there. I am curious to see if the Cubs either offer him something or give him a qualifying offer. I think you go, if he's 30 years old, I'd go 4, maybe 5 years and 120, 150 million. Even 5 years is probably pushing his usefulness. If you can get it, I don't think he's going to agree to anything less than 5 years, because he's going to want that security off of what he's done. Plus, he's got a ring now to back it up. He's going to want that financial security long term because of what he's put in so far. So it's the same thing we always see every year. It's the dance, in money between the front office and the player. We'll see what's going to happen. Everything that I have heard over the last couple of years really points to Arrieta probably not coming back. They had to go to arbitration, they avoided arbitration this year, but there was talk of going to it. So, I mean, we'll see what happens.
It would be interesting, though, to see the Cubs make a decision to dish him at the trade deadline and pick up 3 or 4 strong pieces to replace him and see how that affects their rotation.
If Quintana's still available, do you go across town and think, okay, we have a young pitcher here. If Quintana is doing what he's been doing last year, still has that team-friendly deal, do you grab him? Do you grab a couple of prospects out of the White Sox farm system if they have any ones that kind of spark your interest? And do you – because at that point, a team's going to know that Arrieta is a rental. That's going to be the hard thing.
Right.
So it'll certainly be, an interesting thing coming down the pike, but we'll see what happens. I know what he wants. The problem right now is that, like I said, he is not putting up the same numbers consistently that his peer Max Scherzer has been doing. And I think Max Scherzer is much more of a person who has really earned that money. Hell, we even said Steven Strasburg got overpaid. Adnan Virk agreed with us when he was on a couple of months ago that, you know what, it was one of those things that it was a knee-jerk reaction, try and keep him because he means a lot to our organization, but he not mean a lot, but he means a lot when he's playing, not when he's hurt.
That's right. Exactly it. So there's been a lot of talk lately on certain baseball podcasts that discuss strange happenings in baseball, like this one. That there are a lot of things going on in baseball this year that people are unhappy about. And we've kind of talked the intentional walk thing to death, and we've kind of talked the 30-second time limit thing to death. But there are a bunch of more rules coming down the pipe that are supposed to, however, speed the game up. And you and I both think that if a baseball, or I think I speak for both of us when I say this, but if a baseball game is 3 hours and a football game is 3 hours, and in a football game you get 12 minutes of action, nobody should be complaining about how long it takes to play a baseball game. I mean, are we both sort of in agreement about that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, baseball is just a different animal altogether in the way that its action is produced, and I understand that. And some of the rule changes that were announced aren't necessarily about pace of play. Granted, the intentional walk one is the 30 seconds by a manager to initiate a challenge is, and the umpire review. But there are things like the Carter Capps rule, the rule about base coaches having to stay in the box, which really won't be anything that I think has a big impact on anybody, in the game in a normal sense as far as watching it goes. The one that kind of stuck out to me was that on Mike and Mike a week or two ago, he said that he might actually be, Rob Manfred rather, said he actually might be somewhat intrigued and consider over time a two-way radio system for a manager into a batter's helmet to allow signs to be relayed and that kind of thing without having to have him step out and look at coaches. And that got a little bit too far for me, but who knows? It could be interesting.
I don't like it.
I mean, make your signs faster, but yeah, man, there have been a couple of things, as well as the field marking, which we'll get to in a minute. But out of all these, what sticks out to you as kind of the biggest rule change positively and the biggest rule change negatively that we're going to see in 2017? And I don't know your story about the Texas A&M baseball game, so that's probably going to be one of your one of the pieces of evidence to your negative, but see if you surprise me here.
Yeah, I'm not going to go with the intentional walk thing. We have ground that into the ground. We both know that we both hate it. But for those of you who want to know, I
am coming around to it, though.
For those of you who want to know what Graham's talking about, the day that the intentional walk rule was ratified by Major League Baseball and instituted, that very day, Texas A&M won their first game of the season on an overthrown intentional walk where there was a runner on third base, the pitcher threw a wild throw on an intentional walk, and the runner scored in the bottom of the ninth inning, and it ended the game. It was a walk-off intentional walk throw. And it just kind of cemented in my mind that, this is something that does happen. We've seen it happen in Major League Baseball. We've seen it happen all over the place. I hate that rule, but that's not the one of the two that I'm going to talk about today, because we've kind of warmed over that rule. But the rule that I think is probably the most positive is the amendment that requires base coaches to position themselves behind the line of the coach's box closest to home plate and the front line that runs parallel to the foul line prior to each pitch. Once a ball is put in play, a base coach is allowed to leave the coach's box to signal a player so long as the coach does not interfere with play. This, to me, is the most common sense amendment to any rule that we've seen so far. And that's because third base coaches should not be walking out of the third base coach's box while the pitcher is pitching. It's disruptive. It can really bother the pitcher if they catch the movement out of the corner of their eye. And add to that the fact that that box is there for a reason. Now, I get it. Third base coaches have to come out of the box to signal players. You have the third baseman in your way when you're trying to signal a guy. You have the issues with the guy having to be able to pick you up on the fly. I get all that. But before the pitch, before the ball is put in play, they should be in that box and they should stay in that box, not walking down the third base line towards home plate. So I like that rule the best. The rule that I don't really, I guess I don't dislike it. It's not a negative rule. I kind of like the rule, as a matter of fact. It just feels to me like it attacks a guy. And that's the Carter Capps rule. And for those of you who don't remember who Carter Capps is, we talked about him briefly on the show when he went to San Diego, and we talked about that really strange release that he has, where he kind of does a hop step with his back foot and ends up all the way at the front of the mound. So Major League Baseball...
And a caveat, the guy's throwing over 100 miles per hour. So while you're already getting a baseball on you in 0.4 of a second, that extra 2.5 feet is a huge disadvantage to a hitter.
Right. So Major League Baseball, in direct response to Carter Capps' delivery, amended or added to Rule 5.07 and says it formalizes an umpire interpretation by stipulating that a pitcher may not take a second step toward home plate with either foot or otherwise reset his pivot foot in his delivery of a pitch. If there is at least one runner on base, then such an action will be called a balk under Rule 6.02a. If the bases are unoccupied, then it will be considered an illegal pitch under Rule 6.02b. And basically what that means is that Carter Capps is not allowed to jump forward, come down on his back foot, and then stride to the end of the mound and throw a pitch. While that seems pretty common sense, it does seem common sense to me. I'm sure it seems common sense to most of you. It feels like they're attacking Carter Capps, putting a rule in place that doesn't just affect one player, although they named it after that player sort of unofficially. Seems like, well, it's a little rough, man. It's one guy's delivery, and it's a guy who's been delivering like that probably his whole life. But looking at the way Carter Capps throws, and I know I was saying this before we got on the air, Graham, but looking at the way that Carter Capps throws, I don't know that it's going to be impossible for him to change that delivery. Because when you look at his delivery, what he does is he hops off the rubber and he just kind of drags that back foot back to the ground right before his front foot hits the ground, just as like a little stabilizer. I think really the direction he's going to go in altering that throw is, instead of dragging that back toe, he's just going to make an extremely long stride from his rear foot to his front foot. Because like we talked about before, there's no verbiage in here that indicates that he has to stay in contact with that rubber. They're not saying he can't jump forward. They're saying he can't jump forward and put his pivot foot back on the ground.
Exactly, and there was some discussion about this with Dennis Lin of the San Diego Tribune and also MLB.com's AJ Cassavell, that the team and the league seems to be interpreting this new rule to mean that Caps can drag his foot as long as he's not picking it up and then resetting it. And it is really, it's kind of reminiscent of a softball delivery, and it kind of gives you that feel of a crow hop is what it's called in softball, of basically both feet being off the mound at one time. And, if he wasn't wearing cleats, didn't have those metal spikes, he probably wouldn't be doing this, because he'd either be, stretching in a way that he would be singing a very high C at the end of every pitch. But I'm not against the rule because he is gaining so much ground. I understand that, I hope this doesn't bode negatively for him. He will obviously have to change the way he delivers. And there are, I think there's one or two additional pitchers that do it. I've seen one from the Atlanta Braves. So I'm interested to see, and obviously he's coming back from Tommy John. So we'll see, how he responds coming back from Tommy John surgery number 1. And then we'll see what that means for him long term. As far as for me, the intentional walk one, I'm getting over it. There was a statistic I saw that an intentional walk happened 1 out of every 3 regular season games. So, yes, things can happen, and I would have liked to see it continue, but I don't have an issue with it. The one that kind of surprised me is that there is now a prohibition on the use of any markers on the field that could create a tangible reference system for fielders. The Mets made a formal complaint that the Dodgers were using lasers to map the field out. Then there were spray painted X's, or there were different markers on the field for guys. And if you ever watch it, and I actually saw this between the Giants and the Rays when I had a chance to go to a game last year, that the guys have in their back pockets a list of places they're supposed to be for every fielder. So, I guess, you want to make guys do it more off of memory and make them work a little bit harder, that's fine. To me, it's a pretty big knee-jerk reaction when there really wasn't a problem with it. Hell, if it's that big of an issue, then why don't both teams do it? Hey, you know what, we use this color, you use that color. What does it matter? You can spray paint the ground green again, which you see a lot of teams do, especially in spring training down here, or when in minor league baseball, when the ground begins to get dry and some of the grass is kind of dying, spray paint it green so it looks alive. So, it's not that much of a disadvantage. So, to me, that was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. The one I like the most is the conditional 2-minute guideline for the replay umpire to render a decision allowing various exceptions. Now, what I don't know is what these exceptions are going to be. Nothing was explained, nothing was broken down by Major League Baseball as to what an exception is going to be, what is considered a valid exception, what is not. But I think we're all sick and tired of the 3, 4, 5-minute review, because it's putting the pitcher at a disadvantage. It's tightening him up. There's a possibility here of injury. If he's throwing continuous pitches to stay loose, at that point, then not that you're adding to a pitch count, but it's adding more wear and tear on the arm and elbow than what is necessary. So to me, if you're having to look for the lace of a glove, as Jerry Davis said to us, to touch a guy's pant leg, man, get over it. All right, we don't need to nitpick here. So I like that rule the most out of this is to keep the game speeding up that way. That will help with game time, I think, since replay is so important now. I think that's a good thing to kind of go ahead and help with that piece.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think that of all the rules that we've come across really in the last couple of years that are supposed to be to speed up the game, it's that one. That one is the one that really makes the most sense. When you're talking about these umpires taking 4 and 5 minutes, it's because there's nothing conclusive. If there's nothing conclusive in the first 2 minutes, it's done. It's just like the idea of football where, okay, maybe it's not confirmed or maybe it's not overturned, but it's sustained because there's not enough evidence within 2 minutes to either confirm it or overturn it, to change that call. So I like that rule probably the most out of all the rules, besides keeping third base coaches where they belong. As far as the prohibition for use of markers on the field, this rule to me is obviously a knee-jerk reaction to that Mets complaint, but I don't think that in the long run it's really going to have that big of an effect on any teams. I don't think that markers are something that any team really has to have. Like you said, those guys can carry lists of where they're supposed to be. They play those fields, all the time. For the most part, despite what park they're in, they've probably been in that park before, unless they're playing in an interleague play type situation where they've never been
in a 3 or 4 game series, it won't take you very long to get comfortable with what your general area needs to be if you're an outfielder.
Right. So I don't really care about that rule. To me, it's a non-issue. It's a non sequitur, really. It's just something that people are starting to get up in arms about that really makes little or no difference. It might cause a problem one time on putting the outfield into a shift and the guy's in the wrong spot and the ball gets by him. But for the most part, when you tell a guy to play no doubles defense, he knows where he's supposed to be no matter where he's at. So I don't care about that rule. What I like, and I know that this almost seems inconsequential, but I like this. There's another rule coming out that says when a manager's exhausted his challenges for the game, crew chiefs may now invoke replay review for non-home run calls beginning in the 8th inning instead of the 7th inning. Now, it has been that crew chiefs could invoke non-home run review calls in the 7th inning if the managers were out of challenges. They've changed that and they've moved it back an inning, and I like that because, in my opinion, that adds to the strategy of replay. And yes, there is a strategy to replay. Not every close play has to be reviewed. There are some plays that you just got to let go, move on. Hopefully you can get that one back. But here, if you're challenging a play in the first inning and you lose that challenge, and then you run out of challenges and you're out of challenges by the 3rd inning, you're SOL until the 8th inning. There's not that saving grace at the 7th inning stretch saying, hey, I'm going to get my challenges back. None of that. You're almost at the end of the game now before you're going to get your challenges back. And I like that. I think that adds to the strategy of the game.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I mean, I think that, part of the fun too, most people say is you lose the, and we saw a couple last year with Mike Matheny and Brett Ausmus, but you really kind of have lost that big blow up between an umpire and a manager trying to kind of fight for their guys, or get them to see something, or just kind of come out there just for the sake of getting their team fired up. So it will certainly add to that. And while we're on the topic of umpires, want to wish a very heartfelt and special welcome back to big league umpire Rob Drake. Most of you, I doubt, saw this. Rob was forced to take bereavement leave from Major League Baseball near the tail end of the year. His wife suddenly passed away unexpectedly. So our deepest condolences were sent to him, as well as Jerry Davis, who had worked with him before. But he worked his first game of spring training over in the Cactus League near you, Chris, I think a day or two ago. So very special welcome back to him, and glad that he's back, and just hope for, healing and closure over time. So very painful circumstances, but glad that he is back on the diamond. So, man, we have gone all the way through 28 teams, except the last two that took us into the 10th inning last year, and finally saw over 100 years of pain, sorrow, and Steve Bartman replays. And now the Cubbies are our world champions coming in to 2017. And that we touched on Jake Arrieta, but it's now time to touch on the Cubbies, touch on the Indians, and that goes ahead. That's going to put us through all of our teams. Can
we change that phrasing a little bit? I'm not going to touch on the Cubbies. It's not what I'm going to do.
Your own. Hey, whatever your own personal issues are, man, you do you. So now let's be honest here. There are two big changes: Dexter Fowler, Aroldis Chapman. Excited to have Schwarber back. The Cubs have a conundrum here. I don't know what in the hell they're going to do. Kyle Schwarber comes back, is expected to be the leadoff hitter, which is kind of odd in itself. But you have Schwarber, Jason Hayward, Almora, John Jay was signed. But who else was playing in the outfield last year? Ben Zobrist, the MVP. So where does Ben Zobrist go? Albert Almora, 22 years old, played, in 47 games last year for him. I don't know if he's going to be the everyday center fielder, but you need a guy who can really make that range, and I don't think Schwarber is a guy who you're expecting to have in center. So with Javi Baez, I think really kind of solidifying himself as a big piece of that infield, and Addison Russell, what do you do with these guys?
That's a good question, man. To be honest with you,
I try to ask one per show. I try to ask one good question per show. It's my goal.
Well, I will say that you at least meet or exceed that goal every show.
Well, thank you.
I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. And you gotta sort of envy the Cubs a little bit to have that problem, right? Oh, we've got too many really good players. What should we do with them all? In my opinion, Zobrist is the guy. He's the MVP, like you said. You keep that guy. Schwarber didn't play a whole lot. He's coming back off of a season where he didn't play a whole lot. Yeah, he's at 100%, supposedly, according to him. He's at 100%. He's ready to play. But do you maybe use Kyle Schwarber as a bargaining chip for a piece that maybe you don't have?
Well, there was talk last year that the Yankees wanted Schwarber in a deal for Chapman, and they said politely, as Drill Sergeant Murphy used to say to us in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, was not no, but hell no. So they don't seem at all too concerned or too inclined to move him. And if I recall, I believe Schwarber was part of. No, he was. I thought he was drafted by, or was part of the Yankees organization at some point, but he was drafted by the Cubs in 2014 in the first round, 4th overall. But dude, he's 23 years old. Why? No, there's no way you move a piece like that. I would be more inclined, as crazy as it seems, to move Ben Zobrist. He's older. He's 35 now. Granted, he's a back-to-back world champion with the Royals and the Cubbies. but he's put himself in really good positions the last several years. When he went to Oakland in 2015, that was just, I don't know why, Rays weren't going to keep him. Goes to KC, stays in KC in 2015, and then comes to Chicago. So he's bounced around after he spent, a good about 8 or 9 seasons with Tampa Bay. He's still hitting around his career average. His average is 266. He's been right around there for the last couple of seasons. Not a big power guy, although we saw 18 dingers out of him last year, which is just, it's too shy of 20. We see it twice. He hit 27 in 2009, but that was many moon ago in baseball years. So everything is still there, but like you said with Justin Verlander, the drop in baseball is precipitous. And if you hit that, it is very hard to stop the slide and climb back up. So to me,
the Albert Pujols effect.
Yeah, and obviously Pujols dealing with that plantar fasciitis and a bunch of other ailments that have really kind of hit him hard. But to me, at some point, Javi Baez is 24. Addison Russell's been there for a minute, but he's 23. Zobrist is the odd man out age-wise. You're not going to put a 35-year-old in center field. Hayward is well beyond that age, and he's a better corner guy. So there might be a point where Zobes becomes the odd man out, even though he is the veteran there, and it's going to be interesting to see if he's willing to take a backseat role, which I don't know if he would be.
Well,
if you're Joe Madden, would you do an outfield by committee depending on the day?
I don't think so. I don't think that either Schwarber or Zobrist are really going to want to play in a situation like that. And then if you talk about, is he going to be a 7 guy? Is he going to be a 9 guy? Let's just say for a minute, right, that we're talking about apples to apples, and that they're both going to play the number 7 slot, right? Well, if they're both going to play left field, then you come into this situation where, Zobrist is the obvious veteran. He's also the better hitter. He's also the better on base guy. He's not the power guy that Kyle Schwarber has shown himself to be in his short run in 2015 with the Cubs, when he actually had somewhat of a season when he played 68 or 69 games with them. But he hit 16 dingers in 273 plate appearances. That's almost video game numbers. But his on base of 355 compared to Zobrist last year, 386, and his lifetime average of 358 tells me that Zobrist is the better guy at the plate. But again, like you said, and I can't argue with the fact that the drop is precipitous, and 35 is right around the time when you're gonna see these guys make that turn into just a little bit too old to play this game anymore. And if Ben Zobrist does that this year, and you gave up a Kyle Schwarber, then I guess they could get into trouble doing it.
And they signed John Jay, a center fielder who has bounced around the last couple of years. Started off with the Cardinals and was fantastic. And Jay's only 31 years old. With the Cardinals for a solid 6 seasons. Injuries have plagued him the last 2. Played in 79 games in 2015, 90 games last year. But he hit 291 last year. He's not a power guy. Has 2 homers. He is not a power guy. But the guy who will get you usually double-digit doubles, over 100 hits. Even in 90 games, had 101 hits. His best year is 151 hits at 157 games. So a nice piece. I don't think he's not gonna challenge for a starting role, but a nice piece to have back there. When we move towards the rotation, what do you say when you hear John Lester, Kyle Hendricks, Jake Arrieta, and John Lackey? That's
Well,
what else do you want to say?
If I see that and it's coming to town in the next week, I'm going, well, my guys aren't going to get any hits this week.
Exactly. And Mike Montgomery, who granted was more of a pen piece last year, is slated to be potentially the number 5 starter. And in Seattle, he went 3-4, a 2.34 ERA in 32 games in 2016, and then came to the Cubbies and played 17 games, and again was more of a relief piece. But I mean, the nice thing about Montgomery is he's got plenty to learn from, and plenty to pick him up, plenty of offense to pick him up. Pretty sure that this guy named Chris Bryant, I think he's going to do okay.
He might do all right.
The stuff surrounding him looks pretty good. I hear he's a half decent player, and this Rizzo guy, he might climb the tarp, make a couple of catches. Who knows? So, all in all, between Wade Davis and getting Koji Uehara, which Koji was a guy we discussed last year, and you asked me, did I think that his confidence had been shaken because the Red Sox had brought in Craig Kimbrell? Koji is an older guy. Obviously, he's in his 40s, but I don't think that there's any concern right now that you have a guy. He's been with Boston. Won a ring with Boston. A career 2.53 ERA. Was a little bit rougher last year. Had up in the 3s, and that was really that was the first year since 2009. It was his first year in the big leagues that he had an ERA above 3. So you're going to a team with plenty behind you. When you're going to be used, it's not like you're going to be relied on to keep him in a ton of games. I think it's fine. And Pedro Strop gets an extension. So Zobrist and that outfield to me is going to be the biggest interest that I'm going to see. And of all guys, now Zobes has played with Joe Madden a ton. Obviously, was with him all the entire time in Tampa Bay. Leaves, that's why Madden wanted him. He knows who he is, knows the leadership. It's going to be interesting to see how Joe Madden handles this. But I don't know. They have right now on MLB.com, the Cubs are showing Albert Almora Jr. as being top on the depth chart right now in center field. We'll see how long that actually lasts. But it's certainly going to be something that could open the door to Pandora's box for some craziness in Chi-Town.
Well, my thing about the Cubs, and I said this before we got on the air, is that the Cubs have to do everything that they did last year, but they have to do it better. And I guess what I really mean when I say that is they have to do it cleaner. They can't let teams come back against them. They can't let teams creep on them. The Cubs last year were not only first to 50, they won 50 games in their first 76, which is the fastest that they've ever been 50-game winners since 1918. And one of the faster 50-game winning clubs in baseball. So I understand that going pedal to the metal, all out, all season is just not something you can do. Not for 162 games. It just doesn't work that way. But when you have about half the wins you're going to get that year, prior 8 or 9 games prior to being halfway through the season, you would have liked to at least seen the Cubs win 108, 109 last year, maintain some sort of high pace, and you would have liked to see the Cubs not go so deep into postseason play against teams that they should have beaten out of the gate. And
that was really the thing. Once I finished laughing at your statement originally, because the way you said it was just funny, they got to win the World Series, but they got to win it in 6 games or less, not 7 for it to be just as good of an outcome. But one of the things that you and I agreed to was that, at least I think we agreed, and I can speak for you, in fairness, is that they were at times a very streaky team. And a streaky team, it's not a good thing to have happen. So, yeah, I couldn't really agree with you more that And that's the beauty of both Joe Madden and Terry Francona, who we're going to talk about here in just a second. But they are guys who know how to handle their club, especially when they're getting tired, when they have expectations, when they're being pushed. How often do we see Madden with bring a magician into the clubhouse, have a family, petting zoo day at the field? He knows how to keep guys loose and how to keep, things focused on what your job is, but also understands that there is more to this job than just being on the field day in and day out, getting your body obliterated for 162 games. So at the end of the day, what you said makes perfect sense because, yes, if they show the same struggles, and this is a year now where they've won the World Series, and now everyone is going to start breaking apart everything they do and trying to exploit those weaknesses. You mentioned having faith in the bullpen, which I think he will have, but now you don't have Aroldis Chapman. You got Wade Davis. So now you have to have faith in your bullpen because you can't do to Wade Davis, even when it comes time for October, assuming that they are there. You can't do to Wade Davis what you did to Aroldis Chapman last year. So get used to the idea now, figure out what your rotations are going to be when it comes to the bullpen, what you're going to do, and go from there. And that's something that Joe Madden, there's a reason we thought he should have been manager of the year last year. It's a reason I think that he has a good chance at being manager of the year again this season. It's why I think that we no doubt will see the Cubbies again making a deep run into October.
Yeah, I have no doubt about it. I mean, the payoff from this entire show is going to be that until we see something in regular season play that changes our mind, the incumbent World Series teams this year are the two teams that we saw last year. They're both great. They're both still great. Neither of them lost enough pieces to really be worried about it, and both of them have fantastic coaches. Excellent.
I think it's going to be bigger to see if the teams in the AL don't lose traction the way that they did, because you and I didn't expect – obviously we didn't expect the Indians to be as good as they were last year, but they also ran like a buzzsaw through the division and the championship series. I think they lost, one game out of the 7 that they were required to win, obviously 3 in the division series and 4 in the championship series. I think they dropped game 4 to the Blue Jays in the ALCS, and then game 5 they got shellacked, and that was it. So, granted, the Indians, who we're moving on to now, are getting guys like Michael Brantley is going to be coming back. We'll see if with him coming back from injury, if he can produce in the way that you hope that he will, in the way he was prior to injury, because I think you and I both agree that had Brantley been playing in the World Series, really good possibility there that he would have gone ahead and shut the door in Game 5 or Game 6. That would have been the piece that very likely could have seen the Cubbies turned away last year from hoisting that banner at Wrigley Field come April 2nd. But Tyler Naquin, great rookie. It was a great rookie piece. We discussed the possibility of Rookie of the Year. Numbers kind of tapered off a little bit. Chisenhall still in right field. You keep Lindor, a young, strong piece. He and Kipnis are 2 of the best middle infielders in the game right now. I love watching those guys work. They have a camaraderie together. There's a levity between those guys. I remember watching last year when Lindor came across the diamond, took a fly ball, a little pop fly away from Kipnis, and Kipnis started chasing him into the dugout because it was the third out. And we're in playoff baseball. So, and obviously, I mean, the elephant in the room, Edward Encarnacion comes back or comes to Cleveland. It's a huge piece, on top of what you have where the majority of your bullpen is there. Andrew Miller is going to be your setup guy. And Corey Kluber is going to be your workhorse.
Yeah, and the key really is that Edwin Encarnacion has to play good baseball. And I know that sounds stupid too, but hitting 260 isn't good.
No, he could play bad baseball. I mean, they didn't pay him a ton. He can play some bad baseball. It's no big deal.
No, I don't think it is. I think it is a big deal. And I think they paid him quite a bit of money. I think that Edwin Encarnacion at least has to be able to put up the kind of numbers that he put up in 2015 when he was hitting 277, and most importantly, had less than 100 strikeouts, walked 77 times compared to 98 strikeouts, and was on base at an average of 372 and slugging 557. That's the Edwin Encarnacion that the Cleveland Indians need in order to get over that hump that is the Chicago Cubs and take home the hardware next year. In my opinion.
He was doing that in a ballpark that is a very, very deep ballpark in the Rogers Center up in Toronto. Kind of the odd man out here is a little bit surprising is Brandon Guyer. They brought him over from Tampa Bay at the trade deadline. Lonnie Chisenhall, the incumbent in right field, hit 286, so a solid guy out there. Had a couple of bobbles, in the World Series, but man, Kluber is going to be there. Carlos Carrasco is there. Salazar is back. It makes you wonder if they've redone Trevor Bauer's contract to say no more drone contact. And then Yan Gomes, thankfully, is going to be healthy after he had that injury last year. And we thought that I thought that when Yan Gomes went down, that to me was where I thought that was going to be the crux of the Indian season. That's where everything was going to change. Because when you lose a guy who was a very big piece for you behind the plate, and he's not a big hitter by any stretch, but he's a solid catcher for that staff, and he's healthy, which is a good thing. I'd like to see better offensive production from him. And to be honest, if they can go out there and grab a better catcher, I would not be opposed to it. There just aren't a bunch out there. Maybe if it comes down at the trade deadline, and we'll see what the Mets are doing, as we said a few minutes ago, but maybe the Nats are willing to move Derek Norris or Matt Wieters, because Wieters is only a one-year deal. If that's the case, do you take a run at, hey, maybe we can pull him in? Obviously, the Indians didn't make a heavy move for his services, and I'm not sure what Yan Gomes' contract is going to be, but we could see something down the pipe depending on what Yan Gomes does this year, injury status and all that kind of stuff put together.
Well, interesting thing about Brandon Guyer, since you brought him up, he is kind of the odd man out there, but if he can keep the pace that he had as an Indian last year, keeping in mind that he came over from Tampa Bay not quite halfway through the season, and then he didn't play a whole lot. He only played in 38 games for Cleveland, had 96 at-bats, or plate appearances, excuse me. But the guy hit 333 and a 438 on base. If he can maintain even kinda those numbers, say a 300 average, maybe a 380 on base, as an Indian, that makes him not so much the odd man out anymore, as so much as it says, hey, maybe we found a guy that we can throw in the DH slot and who's going to hit the ball for us.
Well, if that's the case, then why do you have it? What's Encarnacion there for? I mean, Carlos Santana is going to end up being the everyday first baseman. I don't think we're going to see a lot of him, taking plays over there at first base. And with Napoli gone, it's one of those things where when you have Santana and you have Encarnacion coming in, you didn't really have a place for Mike Napoli, unfortunately. And I'm sure they would have loved to keep him, but when you have to make a choice between those three bats, and you have a guy who's in his mid-30s compared to early 30s, unfortunately the axe comes down at a pretty logical point. So the difficulty here still is you have Naquin, who's 23, and then Chisenhall, Michael Brantley. The nice thing with Guyer is we'll see what Brantley can do. He was a guy who was hitting over 300 for the majority of the time of his career. Obviously last year in 11 games, and then the injury happened, and that was everything. But, we'll see what he does coming back. I've heard kind of some mixed things on on what's happening. They still aren't sure of, he wasn't going to play in the first spring training games, took batting practice on February 27th. So there's still no guarantee. Now, granted, I don't know his status, but there's no guarantee that Brentley is going to be an everyday starter. So you may see Geyer, playing in the outfield on a relatively consistent basis. So I certainly think that the Indians are a favorite. I wouldn't say that they are the favorite to get back to the World Series yet. And obviously we're going to get to that here in a couple of weeks when we do our team breakdowns. I want to ask you one more question that somebody asked me the other day. I believe it was T.O. Powell from one of the baseball groups that I follow. He follows our show, and a shout out to him. But he asked me a question that kind of made me think, and I was curious what your reaction would be on this. But Giancarlo Stanton is going to play in the World Baseball Classic. The same Giancarlo Stanton who has struggled mightily at the plate, has not been the same player that we saw before he, basically had his face or half of his face crushed by a fastball. If you were the Marlins, what is your feeling? What is your concern? What do you say to him when he's going to go start playing competitive baseball in the WBC about a month before the 162 very long grind of a big league season begins?
Well, it's hard because on the one hand, I don't want to see Stanton get hurt in the World Baseball Classic. If I'm the Marlins manager, I'm nervous because that sort of gun-shy attitude that he's had since he got hit makes it more possible that he might do or end up in a situation that causes him some injury. At the same time, I want to see Giancarlo Stanton play in the World Baseball Classic, and I want to see Giancarlo Stanton get in and stand in the box and swing from the heels like we're used to seeing him do. And I want to see him get away from that gun-shy attitude that he had. And if playing a few games in the World Baseball Classic helps, then I'm all for it. But at the end of the day, no, I'm not a fan of it.
See, and I had a feeling that was going to be your kind of your take on it. And I don't have any issue with what your with what your opinion is. However, here was my thought. And we've discussed the possibility of maybe a sports psychologist would help, and obviously neither of us are shrinks. We probably need one more than we actually are one.
I see one. When you talk.
Well, I wasn't going to throw your business out there, but hey, we both have seen some crazy stuff in our lives and in our lines of work, and that's a good thing. Obviously, the 22 a day with your dogs for Warriors, all that stuff. Not that we want to get into a heavy topic, but what I hope this comes out to for Giancarlo Stanton is simple. I hope that it comes out to you're putting him in high-stress competitive baseball early in a chance for him to hopefully make solid offensive contact, good production, get him into a rhythm and a groove early. If you can start that in the WBC where you're still facing in a lot of different times major league talent on the mound, obviously in the outfield, but the mound is going to be the important one here. Or even if you end up getting guys who aren't major league talent and you're able to start crushing the ball and getting your confidence up, my hope is that this actually will end up helping him translate that confidence and that rhythm to the Marlins, and we'll see where it picks up. There's a good possibility here. I think this can end up being a very good thing for him over being a negative thing.
Yeah, I agree. I agree it could. Like I said, you want to see him get in there and take pitches and stand in the box and be the old Giancarlo Stanton. And if getting into the World Baseball Classic helps him, I'm all for it. But the chances of him not getting into that, the thing I worry about is seeing pitchers in the World Baseball Classic who are not wildly different from MLB pitchers, but still not the level of pitching that you're going to see in the Major League Baseball. This is like sending Giancarlo Stanton down to AAA to get his confidence back. And you're always going to run the risk of one of those pitchers being wild. And if Giancarlo Stanton gets hit again, he'll never come back from it. That's it. And I don't want to see that happen to him in what amounts to, and I know this is not how they either describe it or how they probably want to describe it, but what amounts to an amateur baseball competition.
I can certainly understand that, without a doubt. So it was something, it was something, and it was kind of a last-second question. I was just curious as to, as to what your take would be on that. So I figured I'd, hey, what's the worst could happen? Ask and see. But and obviously those concerns are the same for a lot of guys. So we're looking forward to the World Baseball Classic. It's going to be all over the place. Obviously going to come to a culmination at Chavez Ravine at Dodger Stadium for the World Baseball Championship. At the end of the day, you can say World Baseball Classic champs all you want. World champions are going to come out of Major League Baseball in the World Series, just how it's going to be. So going to be a lot of fun. I think we're looking forward to it. Nothing like having baseball on at 3 a.m. Being able to wake up and go to work and watch baseball, from North Korea, wherever it is. Quinn Walcott, who I speak to fairly regularly from Major League Baseball, he's umpiring in Mexico City. They tend to do 2 Major League umpires and then umpires from different regions, be it Japan, Korea, Australia, whatever it may be, and then they group them all together to work a crew. So a good chance for guys who haven't made the big leagues or are umpiring in different ways to learn from what I think are still the best.
I just have a real quick question for you because I can't remember if this is something that came up when we discussed baseball coming back to the Olympics. But what does baseball coming back to the Olympics mean for the World Baseball Championship? You think it changes it?
I think what you'll end up doing, and the issue here is going to be, because the World Baseball Classic is done in a pretty quickly. The issue here with the Olympics is that it's going to be mid-season. So either are you going to have college and...
What if the Olympiad, the IOC made the decision to play just once every 4 years, play Olympic baseball in the spring, and then bring those guys to the Olympics, the actual Olympics, the Summer Olympics, just for a medal ceremony. So just the teams that won. So that way, if professional players wanted to play, they could go during spring or during the mid-season break for a day or two to the Olympic ceremony, get a medal, come back, be back with their team.
To me, that's going to be the big thing is because, in basketball, it's always the NBA players, it's all-stars, and it's kind of, it's a joke half the time. And it used to be that, the Olympics were for amateur athletes and athletes who weren't playing in a professional sport. Now, obviously, we see it in soccer and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know how they're going to do it because a lot of big league players, you're not going to give you can't give up the 2 weeks or whatever it is for the Olympics to just leave your team and go because every team's going to take a hit. So yeah, that would be a sensible alternative. The other thing then you got to look at those is, are you going to have them do qualifiers? Are you going to is each team going to have to play qualifiers in the off season, in spring training to go ahead and qualify for the WBC Olympic so there's a lot of pieces to go into it.
What if you partnered with the World Baseball Classic as qualifying games? And then
the WBC I think is still every 4 years. So at that point, at that point, then the WBC is kind of like the Olympics. It's once every 4 years that they have the WBC. So you're going to have to, at that point, find a way to have qualifying games for teams to play in.
They can do that in the winter, though, right? I mean,
well, you can, but how many guys are going to want to go from the world, playing in October to playing in December somewhere? So again, a lot of pieces to it, and it's something that we'll see what they do. Unless you can get big leaguers there,
because the WBC, while it is every 4 years, it's a year ahead of the Olympics.
So you're saying
it's in an odd year. So you could make the WBC the final qualifier for the Olympics the following year, or the year, whatever after.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into this another time. I don't think that quite works, because if that's the case, then, I mean, are you having the WBC, is each team playing just to get the last two? You're not going to have guys playing every time. So, again, this is way beyond what we wanted to get with. It's something that we can discuss at a later time. And guys, hey, you know what? If you find this interesting topic, if you have ideas as to what the Olympics needs to do, how the WBC could be made better, since we have gotten so focused on the show, we didn't even give out any of our social media information. Always, you can find us at OO Left Field on Twitter. Email us, ooleft@gmail.com, and find us on Facebook, Out of Left Field with Chris and Graham. Also, our YouTube channel. We have been slam busy as I am fresh into baseball season. I am also getting into a broadcasting role with SpaceCoastDaily.com down here, which if you want to see my ugly mug call a game, you can do that as well on Space Coast Daily. Unfortunately, Brevard County Schools does not allow us to broadcast the baseball games because of a contract they have with one of our local cable providers. But so, everything else, it has been a good show, a heavy show full of a lot of stuff. So we've got all our team breakdowns. We're going to start getting, doing what we always do in media, which is picking winners for what's going to happen in 7 months now, because why the hell not? So, guys, hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, as always, for sticking around with us. For Chris Furry, Graham McGowan, been another episode of Out of Left Field. See you back here next week. Have a good week, guys.